If you visit the National Basilica of the Immaculate Conception in Washington, D.C., one of the things that you can't help but notice are the beautiful domes that are in the church itself. And one of the newest, actually it is the newest of the domes, is the Holy Spirit Dome. And on one side you have a depiction of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Then on the other side you have the Blessed Mother. And you can kind of see with the way that she's standing how she's a recipient of the gifts of the Holy Spirit. And along the other side that almost connects the Blessed Mother and the Trinity are a number of different saints. And most of the saints have some kind of a direct connection to the United States, or at least to North and South America. You know, for example, St. Elizabeth Ann Seton is one of the saints you'll find. St. Damien de Veuster, who worked with people with leprosy in Hawaii, is also represented. You'd find St. Martin de Porres. You'd find St. Juan Diego, who Mary appeared to at Guadalupe. You'd see St. Catherine Drexel. All the names that we associate with North and South America. But there's also one too that is striking, and that's St. Josephine Bahkita. And she wasn't a person who was associated necessarily with the United States. As a matter of fact, she was born in Sudan and lived a good portion of her life in Italy. But I think that her story certainly is one that I think resonates with us in the United States because of how she spent the early years of her life. She was born in Sudan in the 19th century, and at one point there was a war, and they captured people in the war, including the young Josephine, and she was sold into slavery. And so from the age of 9, she was a slave and was working in a home, among other homes that she lived in, of an Italian family. When the Italian family left Sudan, they took Josephine with her. And she ended up going to Italy with them. And she ended up, enjoying her life in Italy. She thought that it was a beautiful country. She was also in many ways a governess to the children in the family. And she always enjoyed accompanying the children to school. And when she accompanied the children to school, she would often hear, even though she was not in the classroom itself, she'd often hear the nuns speaking about the Catholic faith and about Jesus Christ. And she became very attracted to what it was that she heard. But yet, in spite of the fact that she enjoyed her life in Italy, she was still, at least as far as she thought, a slave. When the family was going to move again, she wanted to stay behind in Italy. And the matter ended up in court. And that's when she gained her freedom. Because what she did not realize was that in Italy, slavery had already been outlawed. And the fact that she was in Italy meant she was no longer a slave. So she had her newfound freedom. And when she had her newfound freedom, she accepted the Catholic faith. And not only accepted the Catholic faith, but entered the order of nuns that ran the school where she first heard about the gospel and first heard about Jesus Christ. And she spent the remainder of her years doing all sorts of different tasks. She was known for her gifts as a seamstress. She was also known for her gifts of cooking. She was known for her compassion. But also, too, for many years, she was the doorkeeper. And being the doorkeeper allowed her to serve the needs of others, which oftentimes were great, because she would have lived during both World War I and World War II, and would have seen firsthand the havoc and the destruction that war caused, as well as the way it impacted Italy, particularly being under the Mussolini regime. And then later, when they were among the Allies, trying to rebuild the country. But what I think we see with St. Josephine is someone who, faced certainly great challenges that most of us cannot imagine. I don't think most of us can imagine his children being captured and sold as a slave. We also see, too, though, someone who joyfully lived her faith amidst challenges and had the love of Jesus Christ in her heart and shared that love. what we see in her life is someone who, as a person of faith, whether she realized it this way or not, was working to recreate the world in her own way, in her own special calling, and to do so in a way that made the world more the world that God created it to be, and the world that Jesus Christ shows us it can be. And I think that as we look at our first reading today in our gospel, we're reminded of that. In our first reading, we hear about God creating us. We also hear about the Garden of Eden. And we see in God's creation, perfect beauty. And this is what the Lord intended us to enjoy. But I think, as we hear the story today, we know that in the upcoming days, we're going to hear that that's not how the story stays. The reality of sin is going to enter. And with the reality of sin, the world becomes not the world God created it to be, but a world in need of a Redeemer. Then we have Jesus Christ in the gospel today. And he's rather stern in the gospel. It's a continuation of the gospel that we began hearing yesterday, where Jesus is confronting people for saying one thing and doing something else. And then he speaks to his followers privately and explains a little further what he's getting at. And when he's speaking with his followers, which would have been Peter, James, John, Andrew, the apostles, he basically was telling them, that he wanted them to be people whose actions and their words matched. He wanted them to be people who lived the message he was preaching. He didn't want them to be hung up on small things, but wanted the bigger picture. He wanted them to be about restoring the world and making the world that God created it to be, what Jesus' mission was about, and what their mission would be about as well. And I think that when we look at so many of our saints, and particularly this morning, St. Josephine, who may be a saint that's not quite as familiar as others, we see how the work of God's plan to make the world that he created to be, and people who follow Jesus Christ work enabling that to happen as they follow Jesus Christ, can make a difference. It can happen with the greatest saints, but it also happens through the good works and the prayers of you and me.